Afternoon, Christo in for Ian Collins. We're discussing the controversy around the gender recognition debate, the gender reform bill, which would change the way in which gender recognition certificates are issued to those people who have gender dysphoria, who wish to live as a different gender to the one that doesn't match the sex that they were assigned at birth. Now, I want to make it clear, I want there to be a solution to this. I believe that exists. I believe that you are able, that there are people who are unfortunately, though in many cases it can turn out to be a very happy experience for them eventually, it's unfortunate that they can live in a different gender to the sex that they've been assigned at, that they can feel like they are a fraud, have a terrible time of it. We just heard, actually, we were still joined by them, Zoe Cheney and who's a trans woman and entrepreneur, and Susan Smith, co-director for Women Scotland. And Susan, I want to turn to you, actually, because we just heard from Zoe there, a trans woman saying that, look, you know, for years I would have loved to have been something else. I would have loved to have not been in this situation. I lived in my new gender for 2 years until I had the full assignment surgery. What is the position of For Women Scotland? Do you believe what you're hearing from Zoe? Do you believe that people with gender dysphoria exist? And do you have sympathy for the plight of people like Zoe to get to where they are?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, gender dysphoria, I think it must be a horrific thing, as with any form of body dysmorphia, psychologically very crippling. And, you know, I think what we've got to, this is a terrible position in many ways, because obviously there was the GRA passed in 2004, and it was supposed to be about a very small number of people, because thankfully only a small number of people do have gender dysphoria. And it was to help those people. And I think there was always a sort of a bit of a social contract between the people who, I suppose one might describe them as old-style transsexuals, who had gone through this process and were acutely aware that of all the kind of nuance that sex is different to their feelings, and that they had a responsibility to make sure that the system wasn't abused and all of that sort of thing. This bill isn't about people with gender dysphoria. I mean, one of the really astonishing things during this whole debate has been the fact that there's no definitions in this bill. There's no definition of what a trans person is, although we have been told that many trans people don't have gender dysphoria, that they're perfectly happy with their bodies. So it's been a really strange thing that there is seemingly a group of people in Scotland who are perfectly happy to walk around looking like men and with full beards and everything else, who apparently still need to get this recognition. Call me cynical, but I don't think that was what the original legislation was designed for. I think it was designed for this small group of people. And so I think and so he's right. This is rebounding on the whole community.
And I think you've absolutely nailed, both of you actually, where things seem to have shifted, because, you know, weirdly, I think as a society we were really tolerant of what used to be transsexuals, and we used to get that some people would change through surgery. I think where it became really toxic was when it was that someone would not change their appearance surgically and not have any of the what is required surgically, meaning that someone who can present as male with male body parts can say, actually, I feel that I am female, my gender is female, even though I present as a male, I have male body parts, so therefore I can use female facilities. There is where it started to get really toxic. But there are going to be people, and Zoe, I'll come back to you, who say, well, look, we still need to protect the rights of those people. If you are someone who presents as a man and has male genitalia, but you say, well, I feel like I'm a woman, what's the solution there? Should those people who are probably being targeted by this new way of getting gender recognition what's the solution there?
Damn good question.
I don't believe there is a solution, by the way. I don't believe there is a solution.
I think that person that you just described is very. I've never met one of those people. Maybe they exist. I have no idea. I mean, on my journey, after I became me full time, and I had my 2 years before the surgery, I'm a member of a gym. I go 5 times a week. I'm very sporty, and I had to then decide, okay, which change room am I going to use? Well, I'm on hormones. I've grown hair. I've grown boobs, and I can hardly stroll into the men's changing room. I mean, that would be thoroughly inappropriate every which way, even though I still had male genitalia.
So were you still using a female changing room whilst having a penis?
Yes, but with respect. So if I was changing the bottom half of me, I would find a cubicle, and if it wasn't a cubicle, I'd go into the toilet cubicle and change there with a locked door. There's no way that I agree with a lot of the more extreme trans voice you hear, that because they identify as a woman, they should be able to walk through a
but
female.
There will still be, Zoe, but there will still be some women, and Susan, I don't want to put words into your mouth, I don't know if you're one of them, that would still say, well, I'm sorry, the fact that those body parts still exist, there is no way that those, I mean, what do you think, Susan? Even if someone is like Zoe, who is living as a woman, is preparing for surgery, but still has male genitalia, is there a place for a person like that in women's spaces?
I don't think so, because I think that women have.
Even with the mitigation that Zoe has outlined, that she would go into a cubicle, she would be very, very respectful. What do you say to that?
No, because now we've got to a point where it's very hard to say where that line is, and I think that line has to be. We've got to a point. And this is what this debate has brought us to. We've got to a point where we have to have a line about sex, and we certainly have to have a line about things like male genitalia and women's changing rooms. I think third spaces are something that hasn't been talked about, and probably is an option not just for people who are trans, but maybe for people who might have caring, be looking after someone of the opposite sex, caring responsibilities. So third spaces would probably be helpful in those scenarios. One thing I wanted to say as well on this bill and this process that has really concerned us is the impact on younger people, because we've spoken about the reflection period that Zoe and others have had. And I think one of the reasons that was in the original Act was to allow people the space to get counselling and to evaluate how they really take time over a really quite serious decision. We're especially worried about children, and the Cass report has highlighted a lot of the issues, especially around girls. We have the same issues in the clinics in Scotland, and they are rushing ahead. And now we have the possibility that 16 and 17-year-olds can get these GRCs. And the evidence from other countries is that, and the evidence in Cass is that once you start to affirm people, they will seek out medicalised processes without actually having gone through
let me get Zoe to respond to both of those points, because Zoe, I saw you were shaking your head, because it must be difficult for you to hear that even when you were sort of carrying out those mitigations. And I actually understand Susan's position. Susan, you don't sound like a sort of raving, extremist. I understand why you would be saying, someone who has male genitalia, it's really difficult to hear that they're in a women's changing room. But what's your response to that, Zoe?
It is difficult. And I appreciate it's difficult, but again, in my opinion, it's about finding a mid-ground. It's trying to be reasonable and respectful.
Is it a third changing room, maybe?
You could do a third changing room, and I would have been happy to use that. That wouldn't have bothered me. But most places don't have it and won't be able to afford to put one in. They won't have space, etc., etc. There's lots of there's lots of public swimming pools these days that only ever have one changing room anyway, and lots of private lockable cubicles within that changing room. Nobody seems to. That was well before the trans debate became an issue. No one ever had a problem with that. And if I'm going into, or now obviously I've had the surgery, but before the surgery, how dangerous would it have been for me to go into a men's changing room? That would have been utterly perverse. And if I'm going to go in, I need to go into a changing room. So if I've got to pick one of the two, I'm going to pick the women's one.
No, I understand, because otherwise you'd end up in a situation where with someone then with breasts in a male changing room. I understand it. Look, I really appreciate the debate. You've been so respectful, the two of you, about it, and I'm so glad that we were able to have it without it becoming as toxic as we see some of these debates becoming. So thank you for that.